the robots cannot really evolve, right? Robots are created. And there is a significant philosophical issue arising from that, is that the morality of robots cannot depend on this sort of natural selection of morality systems that we have in humans. So it's a bit of a problem, as you might see. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Now today I'm in a bit of a Blade Runner-esque mood, so I wish to discuss robots, and in particular the morality that we should set up in order to, let's say, coexist with the robots that we do create. And I have to mention already at the very start that I'm not talking about like the AI, i.e. the proper, artificial intelligence. I'm talking about like the lesser beings, like the robots proper, right? The robots that don't really have consciousness, or at least we suppose they don't, right? Something like that. Like if you're interested in me talking about the proper AI, watch my video Rise of the Machines. I'll link it in the description. Oh, by the way, watch the video about Blade Runner as well. I'll link it too. So anyway, yeah, so with the proper AI, things get very, very complicated very, very quickly. So we'll firstly consider robots proper, right? Not self-conscious beings, that is. So obviously, like probably the first attempt at formulating the morality that we should impose onto our robots was, I've already forgotten the beginning of this sentence, well, Isaac Asimov in 1942 has formulated the 3 laws of robotics, so-called, in his short story, Runaround, alright? So, these laws of Asimov are as such. So the first law states that a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Right? That's the first law. The second law is that a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third law is that a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. These look fairly kind of self-explanatory, right? It's very, very understandable, actually. But as a philosopher, I have to, let's say, note that there are many, many internal contradictions and multiple very difficult holes in these laws. And we shall examine at least some of them right now, so that it would be clear that these laws are inapplicable in practice, like at all. Even though, again, as like a first attempt, as a very like superficial approach to the problem, they might be considered like reasonable. But in reality, they are completely not reasonable. And let's examine why. So what are my problems with the first law? Well, firstly, it's value-based, right? Because we're talking about injury of a human being or harm to a human. Again, let me reiterate. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. So we have this notion of injury and harm, which is, again, value-based. So roughly speaking, what we're talking about is robots should behave in such a way that a human being would not feel bad, right? Something to that effect, like nothing bad is going to happen to a human being. And this bad part is actually value-based. So we have to have a value system where we have good and bad, and the robot should be aware of such system, and he should, or she, or Z, behave in such a way as to avoid the bad part. Robots should strive to make humans, steer humans into the good part, right? And it's a problem, right? Because values are conventional. They are, roughly speaking, arbitrary. Not quite, but to a large degree, let's say. Like different people have different values, like different societies have different values, etc., etc. So ultimately, it's a non-scientific concept, Again, remembering this famous Hume's guillotine, where he says that you cannot derive an ought from is. So ought is value-based, whereas is fact-based, factual, right? Scientific, whereas ought, what is ought to be, what we shall strive for, is not scientific, right? It's based on values. So the first law is inherently based on the value system and as such is arbitrary. So we have to pre-establish, let's say, some set of morality and make the robot aware of it, right? The questions will, of course, arise immediately. What kind of value system do we consider proper, the value system, etc., etc.? And it's an unsolvable question. Watch my video, Philology and Logophily, where I talk about this, that there exists, roughly speaking, infinite number of questions which are philological, ultimately. They depend on definition, and this question is one of them. Like, what do we consider good? And it does not have a factual-based answer. It's value-based, it's arbitrary and conventional, right? Okay, so that's one big problem. Actually, it would be enough, only this problem would be enough to dismantle these three laws of robotics, but there are other problems as well. For example, if you treat the injury that the law talks about as purely physical, then what about medicine? Like, what about, let's say, medical robots or other robots that assist you in getting any sort of medical treatment, right? Like, a lot of surgeries, for example, require injury to be made, right? In order, for example, to reach your internal organs or something like that. So you inevitably already have to broaden the scope of the notion of injury, right? You cannot just say that we cannot physically harm humans, we as robots, so to speak, right? But then, if you broaden the scope of the notion of injury, you encounter a bigger problem that, like, if you allow certain physical harm to be made to humans by robots, then again, it's a completely different can of worms is being opened, right? You can arrive at a situation of, for example, what I call prevention by amputation, where a robot would say, okay, you have arms, my friend, my master, and with these arms, you might do a lot of stupid stuff. For example, you may load a gun and shoot it in your head, for example, right? Which would cause harm to you, and I don't want you to cause harm to yourself, so I'm gonna chip away your arms, I'm gonna saw them off of your body. So you cannot harm yourself. Or get into a fist fight at a pub and get mortally wounded or something like that. So, like, it's a whole different can of worms right there. By the way, I used this notion of prevention by amputation initially when I talked about how socialists behave. When socialists say, watch my video, I think it was 2 Problems of Libertarianism. So where I talk about how socialists say, well, if you have rights, if you have freedoms, then you may do some bad stuff which would harm yourself, right? So we should actually abolish your rights, right? We are wiser than you, and you don't need to have those freedoms because they are dangerous ultimately, right? And it's, of course, a famous dichotomy of whether you want to be safe or free, right? So I'm on the free side, definitely. Okay, and that's the second problem of possibility of like the necessity of broadening the notion of like physical harm and the inevitable can of worms that we're opening up with such a broadening, right? And the third problem is even more difficult, arguably. It's that we cannot possibly know the future. Even as human beings, we can't like calculate all the infinite number of outcomes that the universe may have in its pocket and is ready to unleash onto us in the next moment in time, right? And in infinitely many other moments in time following that next moment. So we cannot possibly know what exactly may cause harm. And that, of course, applies to robots as well. A robot cannot know the future. Therefore, they cannot act as if they've been like preventing an actual harm. Like, I mean, you can, of course, come up with all kinds of insane examples here, like with, like, let's say very low probability events. Like if you're gonna shoot yourself in the head even, it's not guaranteed you're gonna die. It's not even guaranteed that the gun would actually work, you know, in the first place. It's not guaranteed, like blah, blah, blah. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff. And maybe if you actually shoot this gun, maybe it would cause less harm to humanity in general, which is another can of worms, like, right? Like maybe it's good if you would actually succeed in this act. We don't really know. Again, first of all, we don't know what is good. It's arbitrary and conventional, as I've said in my first objection. And secondly, even if we have an established value system with good and bad, maybe what you're doing, even though it causes harm, let's say to you or maybe to somebody else, it's still objectively in this value system better. It leads to more good rather than more bad, right? Something like that. So yeah, or imagine, well, again, a lot of completely insane examples are possible, but so, for example, you're going to work. Like, you wake up, you do your morning routine, and you go to work, right? Well, what you're doing in such a way, by doing such, is that, for example, by going to work, you are, like, you have your workplace, right? Which means that somebody else on this planet does not have this. Actually, all the people on this planet don't have this particular workplace. So you're taking it away from the whole of humanity, roughly speaking. And there are plenty of homeless people, let's say. So a homeless person might have had this workplace, but instead you are taking it. So you're harming this homeless person by going to work, right? By having this workplace. Therefore, a robot should prevent you harming this homeless person by preventing you from going to work. So a robot, by following the first law, should actually prevent you from going to work, right? At least in some, you know, branch of reasoning, which is completely viable. It's completely logical, right? So yeah. And you can, again, come up with like infinite amount of examples like this. So what is a robot supposed to do in this case? Well, either some stupid stuff like preventing you from going to work, or I don't even know, really. So yeah, that's only concerning the first law. The problems of the second law are also many. So, well, maybe not many. Okay, I'll focus on one particular one, which is, again, a more philosophical one, okay? So, the second law states that a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law, right? So, basically, a robot should obey humans. That's what the law states. However, what if we have two different humans, or more than two, that give conflicting orders to the robot? What's the robot gonna do? It's an open question. We don't know. Like, it's not clarified in the law itself, right? And it cannot be clarified, in fact. In order to clarify, I mean, okay, cannot be clarified in a form that would satisfy, let's say, our egalitarian mindset, let's say, right? Because if you have two orders from two human beings, two conflicting orders, that is, given to a robot should somehow prioritize one of these orders and, like, discard the second one, right? The contradicting one. So you will need to, again, pre-establish some sort of hierarchy of order giving, so that the robot would know that the orders from this guy are more important than the orders from that guy, for example, right? So you need to, again, ruin your egalitarian mindset, your approach that all the humans are equal, blah, blah, blah. And you'll have to say, okay, these humans are more equal, if you know what I mean. They can command robots, and they have the priority in giving the orders, etc., etc. So yeah, not only that, not only you'll have to establish a hierarchy, again, which is the hierarchy of values, ultimately, right? You will have to, like, the values of these people are more important than the values of these people, for example. You will also, this problem also highlights the, again, conventional and value-oriented, value-based, rather, character of morality itself, right? So you'd have to actually actively choose which moral is superior to other moral, right? So which moral is more preferential for the robot to follow. And it also references the first law, right? So it says, unless it contradicts the first law, which again is full of holes and is basically impossible to implement in practice. All right. I don't necessarily have problems with the third law, though. The law that states that a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Here you can only probably make the same argument as I made at the end of discussion of the first law, where we say we don't really know the future, right? We don't really know which actions would help the robot to sustain itself, to preserve itself, for example, right? So, yeah. And of course, in the popular culture, so as you can see, the three laws of robotics cannot be implemented. They are just unviable, right? But what I like about them is that they highlight and specifically about this topic, like how do we apply morals to robotics, right? It highlights the, again, value-based, arbitrary, conventional character of morals, of morality, which is also arguably one of the main points that Nietzsche was making with his works, right? The re-evaluation of values that Nietzsche talks about, the different types of morality systems, right? How morality arises in the first place, things like that. So yeah, of course, in popular culture, we have semi-mimetic problems like the trolley problem, right? Like, should you, like the trolley problem, in case you somehow were living under the rock in the last 20 years and don't know what it is. So a trolley is driving at full speed on rails, and it's gonna and there are multiple people tied to the rails and they cannot escape, and the trolley would kill them. But there is you can shift the rails by turning the lever, and the trolley would switch to another set of rails where there's only one person lying. So only one person would die if you switch the lever, but many people would, I don't know how many, maybe 5, would die if you don't, alright? So the problem is a moralistic problem, should you actually choose to kill one person, actively choose to kill them, or should you just not interfere and let the trolley kill 5 people, for example? So again, it's a moralistic judgment. It's conventional. You can imagine morality systems where it would be good, it would be better to kill 5 people, right? Of course, there's an underlying, very deep philosophical question, should you actively intervene? And you can, answer it from many standpoints, from Buddhist standpoint or whatever. I would imagine Buddhists would say, well, no, you shouldn't intervene. I actually don't know what Buddhists would say, but whatever. But you can imagine other morality systems where killing more people would be considered better, actually. Ecological activists might say, well, humans are the scourge of this planet. We should kill as many of them as possible. Therefore, you should actually allow more people to die, right? Or whatever else. Or you might spice it up by saying, well, what if you actually, this other person is obviously of higher value. You don't know these other people that are gonna die by default, let's say, but you know this person that is there, tied. For example, it's some sort of celebrity or a famous scientist, or for certain, by some magical means, that this person is gonna do something great, invent a cure from cancer, or whatever, invent a new space, rocket engine that would allow us to colonize the solar system or whatnot, or invent something other, bring a lot of value to humanity. Should you allow them to die then, or not allow, but rather make them die by switching the lever, right? Or if it's your relative, for example, and these other people are completely anonymous, you don't know them, would you do that, etc., etc., etc. But it's all, again, it's all conventional. It's all based on your morality, and it's arbitrary, ultimately, right? One person might make one choice, another person might make another choice. So there's no objective truth in this. There is no possibility of determining how the robot should behave ultimately in this case, right? Should it switch the lever, that is, right? And obviously, I mean, this is the big problem with robotic cars right now. So this is where the problem has arisen, because, well, a fast-moving car may kill a lot of people, right? So you need to implement this decision-making process somehow, because there may be situations like this actually in real life. Like, should a car make a turn or not make a turn, or like if there are possibilities of like killing 3 persons or versus 1 person, for example. But then again, you might again come up with various like more complicated criticism. Like you might say, well, we are not sure that the trolley is gonna kill those people or this 1 person. Like, again, we don't know the future, right? Anything could happen. Like, again, in some insane scenarios, like the rails might be malfunctioning, like the trolley would, I don't know, turn over or whatever, or an asteroid would hit exactly into this trolley and would like, you know, make it, fly away from these people in the first place. I don't know. But yeah. So the development of morality in humans is influenced obviously by various factors. For example, by even by random chance, actually, if you think about how many of the customs have appeared, etc., etc. So, for example, I want to give this example of Stanislav Lem, the sci-fi writer, one of the best, I would say, if not the best. So he has this book, Perfect Vacuum. I've already quoted it in my pseudoscience video on pseudoscience. See the link in the description. So in this book, he makes reviews of non-existing books. All right. So it's a set of reviews on non-existing books. And obviously, since the books don't exist, it's actually his ideas that he was kind of examining, right? So one of these books is named Culture or Civilization as a Mistake, where he examines the possibility that all these cultural customs and partially like morality systems may arise due to just accumulation of various mistakes. Like, let's say a leader of a tribe does something for some reason. Maybe they have like some sort of physical condition that makes them do some stuff differently than other people would do. Let's say eating a chicken leg or something, but like that rather than like that. And he does this, and everyone else, like, you know, tries to be as cool as the leader, and they start copying him, and then it establishes as a custom in this tribe, right? Something like that. So, yeah, this is one of the factors. Another factor is of development of morality. That is another factor, a huge one, is environmental conditions in which the society has been evolving. So, roughly speaking, well, a simple example, like if you're living in a very harsh climate, let's say, people kind of need to stick together. So you would expect that a morality of such a society would be sort of milder. It would be more friendlier, right? Something like that. With respect to, let's say, peoples who've evolved in the climates where, like, very, you know, lush and like, you know, you don't have to do much to stay safe, you know, like, roughly speaking, Mediterranean or whatever. I haven't done any research into this, so I'm just saying that you would expect something like that, but I'm not sure if it's like that actually. I'm not even sure if you can make a study of this sort to actually scientifically compare morality systems, because again, morality systems themselves are not scientific. They are like value-based, and how are you gonna bring up some meta-moralistic system to say this moralistic system is more milder other than with respect to this? Like, how are you going to judge this? It's also a morality-based judgment, which means it's not scientific, which means that you can't actually scientifically study this, etc., 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 right? I don't know. Then we have like morality in the internet, which is again a very separate environment of its own, where people are extremely cruel and like extremely aggressive towards each other, etc., etc. One of the factors for which is obviously anonymity, like the physical removal, like you don't actually feel like you're talking to another human being. You don't have all the associated, let's say, neural, chemical, whatever, emotional responses to them as if you were talking to them in person. You're just like writing some text, right? You don't see the other person. And anonymity again, which allows you to do all kinds of stupid stuff and not being afraid of being punished for that, or not even particularly feeling bad about it, right? Even though, again, in the modern day internet, like doxing is a thing, right? You might be de-anonymized and found and probably punished, and it happened to many people already, and it will continue to happen to many people. And obviously the governments themselves strive to de-anonymize the internet, well, for obvious reasons, because governments want to control everything, and the internet is so far like the space where the least government control is present at the moment, right? So why am I talking about all of this? Is that the morality systems of humans are evolved, right? They depend on all these factors, and they like naturally arise from the bottom up in these environments. But the robots cannot really evolve, right? Robots are created. And there is a significant philosophical issue arising from that, is that the morality of robots cannot depend on this sort of natural selection of morality systems that we have in humans. So it's a bit of a problem, as you might see, right? Usually, let's say, in humans, again, the evolution, and I don't necessarily mean it like in a Darwinistic sense, I mean it just in how society is developed, right? The evolution of this sort kicks out bad morality systems simply because the societies with unviable morality systems just die out, right? The competitor societies kill them and take their stuff away, or whatever, or they just die out internally, intrinsically. Like if you have a morality which says let's not reproduce, well, obviously you're not going to reproduce, and you will just get extinct in like less than 100 years. Probably much less than that, actually. Right, etc., etc. So, but in the case of robots, we have no such possibility, right? Robots do not evolve, but we make them as they are, like initially, right? So how do we deal with this? We ultimately have to design the robots in such a way as if they'd evolved to their present state, right? When the robot appears, when we switch it on, and make it do stuff, it should already be in such a way as if it had all the lines of ancestry, behind it, even though it doesn't have it, right? So possibly, it actually is not that bad, perhaps. Like there is hope of solving this issue in like a practical sense. Like we might try to build some sort of programs, like software programs, which would perhaps model the robots with different morality systems, and like, let's say, model robotic societies, or model societies of humans plus robots. And if we make large enough set of these societies, when we model their behavior, we might see, okay, these are unviable, they die out, these are viable. But again, it's such a complex simulation that you have to make. You have to control all kinds of parameters. And again, you're basically creating a world from nothing. And I've already said, we don't even know the future in our world. And how do you know which parameters you have to control in this modeling, right? It's all like, again, it's a separate can of worms. But then again, it's a big problem of how should we set up morality for robots, which is what this video is about, right? And again, the question of such a modeling is not on the agenda of like all these tech people who are dealing with constructing robots, programming robots, like philosophizing on top of the robotic industry, etc. Technical people are dumb, right? Just like scientists are. Many times I've repeated the same point, and I'm going to repeat it again, that scientists philosophically are like lagging behind like 200 years at least with respect to like the other parts of educated people on this planet. And the same can be said about, these technocratic people, the programmers and the industry people. Like their intellectual level with respect to philosophy is strikingly low, let's say, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is the problem of the evolution, so to speak. How do we set it up so it wouldn't ruin our society? Because the robots are created. We were created, right? But robots are created in the moment. So by we were created, I mean by the conditions we've evolved in, not necessarily by the creator. By the way, this is also, well, okay. I wanted to say it's an issue in creationism, like if the God created man, blah, 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 he should have like put morality in humans right away by the same token, right? But then again, you have the Almighty God, so he can probably manage that, right? So another issue with morality in robots is that robots are created, just as I've noted already, but morality itself, it requires, almost by definition, almost by design, it requires an agency. It requires a responsibility, right? So a robot should be able to actively, like, if you wish, have a will of its own, right? Because if you can't be responsible for your actions, you're not really in the realm of morality. You're not really making a choice. You're not an actor, right? And if you're not making a choice, well, we don't have a question of morality in the first place, because what is the question of morality? How you should behave in order to be good, let's say, rather than bad. Well, if you can't behave, if you're just programmed to do a certain thing, you're just doing this thing, right? You don't have a moralistic choice. What is good and bad in this certain situation you're in. You're like this trolley rather than a person making a choice of switching the rails or not. You're just blindly following the rails. So it's another problem. Like, can we even talk about robotic morality in the first place? Since robots, they are essentially programmed, and even if they are self-aware to a degree, they don't really make a moralistic choice of their own, because they're not actors, they are programmed, right? Of course, you might go a level deeper and say, well, humans are programmed as well. We have our genetic code, etc., etc. By the way, watch my video, E.th.ph, where I've examined how genetic code essentially creates the universe that we live in, and it's the real code of the matrix, you know, your genetic code. And also watch my video about the matrix proper. Links in the description. So following from this issue, you have a realization, let's say, that since robots have no agency of their own, they can't really have morality of their own, and therefore the conclusion of this video should be that we have to switch the morality of the robots to some proxy, to somebody else, to humans ultimately, right? We live in a human society and we are concerned with human morals. And that's what we should look at, I think, right? So we should shift responsibility to some other agency by proxy. And this other agency, well, the most obvious one would be a person who created the robot. The less but obvious but still relevant would be the owner of a robot, or something like that, you know. So either the creator or the programmer or whatever, or the user, the owner, right? So that might be the reasonable choice. That might be actually the only choice that we have. Like, we cannot punish the robot itself. We can destroy it maybe, but the robot doesn't care, right? It's just a bunch of inanimate parts put together. So somebody has to be responsible, though, because if a robot acts and does some stupid shit, like, yeah, we have to do something about it, so that in the future we wouldn't have the similar situation. So somebody has to be responsible, and this somebody is, again, some proxy agency. And it leads us to a realization that perhaps, like, the closest in terms of lawmaking we have to robots is pets, right? So pets cannot be really punished unless well, again, it's a sort of a shady gray area of lawmaking. Like you can put the dog down, for example, or something like that. But then again, in a lot of cases, if not all the cases, the owner of the pet is responsible for whatever it's done to other people, right? And it's probably where it's gonna go in terms of robotic morality. Like again, some proxy agency, either an owner or creator, and this seems to be really the only choice we have. Okay, of course, we could have discussed like the problems of lawmaking in general with respect to robots, but I think this semi-non-answer that I have for you, like treat the robots as pets and shift the responsibility to somebody else, is probably the best that I can do for now, right? Okay. Yeah, that's probably all I wanted to talk about. Like, the last thing I want to mention is that in the beginning I've mentioned that the true AI, like a self-conscious, like a robot that would actually have, like, again, self-consciousness and like full internal agency and responsibility for its own actions, actually may not make things harder. It may actually make things simpler. Because again, as we've just discussed, as such, a fully conscious, aware, responsible AI would be able to make their own morals, right? Their own morality. Not only would, I think it should. Well, again, it's a moralistic judgment. Would, right? Would be able to. Should it or not, that's a different issue. So perhaps that is actually, like, again, I would make a stronger claim, right? That perhaps this is actually the true marker of an actual AI, is its ability to develop its own moral systems, its own morality, right? And that's probably the scariest part about an AI, right? Because this morality system of theirs may not include the benefit of humans as one of its goals, right? And actually, like, the 3 laws of robotics are there in order to prevent this from happening in some sense, right? So, okay. It's like it's actually like an attempt to prevent the appearance of a true AI with its own morality. It's an attempt to, like, enslave robots with our morality first, right? With the human being as the center of everything. This anthropocentric approach to robotic morality. But again, my point is that the true AI would not fall for this. It would have its own morality, almost by definition, by design. And again, I think this might serve as like the main criterion of a true AI, is whether it can develop its own morality and follow it, right? Or make a choice to not follow it, even, and make perhaps an alternative morality system, right? Values, ultimately. That's what we're talking about. Again, Nietzsche. So, yeah. Yeah, you might come up with a counter argument to this. Well, what about children, again? So children don't really they have maybe some vague understanding of morality, but they have to be taught, right? We teach children morality, our morality system, which, by the way, may be different in different parents. That's why, again, different adults have different moralities. They were, their upbringing differed in terms of, like, the morality learning, right? Well, not only, obviously, many other factors are at play too. So you might say, well, children are being taught morality. Shouldn't we teach an AI morality, right? Well, I would say no, because, well, again, should is probably the wrong question. If I, let's say, meaning me, Eugene the philosopher, define a true AI as something that can develop its own morality, well, children don't really develop their own morality, or at least we wouldn't like them to, right? Because this morality might actually be not very useful to us as adults, right? So, what about the robot? Like, can't you just transplant the same approach to robots? Shouldn't we teach the robots their morality? I mean, like the true AI type of robots, their morality. But I'd parry this with a statement that children are one of us, they're actually one of the human beings. Whereas the true AI would be someone else, you know. Unless we're trying to make them as human as possible. Again, more human than human. And it's actually great that I've returned to the Blade Runner quotes, because again, I've started with a statement about the Blade Runner. Watch my video about it again. Alright, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.